Hello, and welcome to Follow Your Curiosity, where we explore the ups and downs of the creative process and how to keep it moving. I'm your host, Nancy Norbeck. I am a writer, singer, improv comedy newbie, science fiction geek, and creativity coach who loves helping right-brained folks get unstuck. I am so excited to be coming to you with interviews and coaching calls to show you the depth and breadth both of creative pursuits and creative people, to give you some insight into their experiences and to inspire you. One administrative note before we get started this week. In line with the Thanksgiving holiday in the U.S. and Christmas holiday, I'll be re-releasing two of my favorite interviews from earlier this year that I think are worth another listen, or your first if they're new to you. I hope you'll enjoy hearing them again and maybe even be struck by something you missed the first time. Today, however, I'm talking to Tracy Friedlander, classical musician and host of the Crushing Classical podcast, which explores ways that classical musicians are finding career paths outside of the traditional orchestra and performance roles. Tracy and I talk about how she got started with the French horn, what it's really like to audition for and perform in an orchestra and where that can and can't take you, the largely untaught art of listening, what happens when your musical dream turns out not to be quite what you wanted, and how musicians have started to make their own new paths outside the orchestra world. Even if you're not a classical musician, there's a lot to inspire you in this interview. So here's my conversation with Tracy Friedlander. Thank you so much for talking with me today.
Absolutely.
So you play the French horn.
Yes.
And I'm curious to know how you got started playing French horn.
Well, it was fifth grade, and band was the thing that was new for school. And of course, I wanted to play the flute like every girl. And but the band director said, we have a lot of flutes, a whole lot of flutes. What about the French horn? And I was, like, I don't know, I really wanted the flute. And then the band director said the magic words to my parents. If she gets good, she'll get a scholarship in school.
Oh.
For college. And they were like, how about the French horn, Trace? What do you think? So, but then I took it home and I was just in love. I got this thing home and it was fun. It was really fun.
That's cool. I'm just thinking that like a French horn is kind of, I have to think, unwieldy for a fifth grader.
My gosh. And I'm a small person anyway. And in fifth grade, I was really small. And I was carrying around this like 45-pound case with an instrument in it. And
my God.
Just struggling to pull it up the bus steps and all of that. Oh my God. Little did I know they have like soft cases and backpacks and things like that. But back then they just give you the giant case,
Yeah. Did it take you a while to kind of figure out how to literally wrap your hands around it?
It was a little bit of a challenge for the size of it, just to figure out. It's a really awkward instrument because it's round with that big bell on the end, and then the mouthpiece is on the other side. And when you're little, really, how you play it is you hold it off your leg or you can rest it on your leg. But when you're short, if you put it on your leg, the mouthpiece is above your head. So there was some navigation there, definitely. But I figured it out over the years as I grew and everything.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I'll bet there were some funny moments with that. I'm just imagining, but probably totally adorable too.
Yeah. My first horn was duct taped together. Like they put duct tape over the bell for some reason. I didn't have that one for very long. Then I got a new one, but yeah. So I set out to play the horn and my parents weren't musicians, so they had no idea what I was getting into. And I just took to it. So they got me lessons starting in sixth grade, which was a really smart move because you really need private lessons for an instrument, for any instrument, but especially an instrument like the horn, I think, because it's so hard.
So did you have group lessons in school then when you first started?
Yes, but there were no other kids that played the horn, so I got private lessons. Yeah. No one else picked it.
Because I did attempt to play the flute for a while. My mother plays the flute. So it was the obvious choice. And I do remember, now that you are talking about this, the group lessons with, 4 or 5 other girls standing there in the room. Yeah. So you got private lessons and then you got real private lessons.
Yeah, so I got real private lessons from a real horn teacher
Mm-hmm.
because my mom also worked in a high school as the secretary in a different high school than where I was going in an elementary school, obviously. But she met the horn teacher, the person who and later I find out this is what I did a lot after I got old enough and it was in grad school. I would go to the schools and teach after school. Like the kids would stay after school and come to the band room and have their lessons. And that's what this guy did, Rob. His
Mm-hmm.
name is Rob Murphy. He was doing that at this high school where my mom was the secretary. So that kind of gave her the awareness that this was a thing, you know. I think it was really funny that she happened to work at a high school at this time because I don't know how because we lived in a really rural area. She would not have it would not have occurred to her I need to find a horn teacher, you know? It sort of
Okay.
fell into her lap. So that was a really good thing. So I started studying with him as a sixth grader, which was great. And then I just took off. You know, once I had a horn teacher who was showing me the ropes and the right the right music to practice and the right programs to get involved with, I started eventually I went to music camp and then youth orchestra and kind of work your way into the scene, you
Mm-hmm.
know, as a student. And that was really what showed me that I could do that for a career because once I got around kids who were more advanced, like at camp and then in youth orchestra, especially once I got into the Chicago Youth Symphony in Chicago, that was a big deal because these were kids who were like looking at it for a career.
Wow. So I'm guessing there must be a lot more demand for French horn than there is for a flute if there was the dangled offer of a scholarship or possibility of a scholarship.
Yeah, probably. I
Yeah.
think that's, yeah, exactly.
So you said your parents really didn't know what they were getting into.
No.
So what surprised them and how did they deal with it?
Um, let's see. Well, first of all, they didn't listen to classical music. So that was a really weird thing. Um, and didn't really they weren't concert goers either. They
Mm-hmm.
loved music. They had a lot of records. They listened to I mean, they always listened to the radio and they liked Chicago and I don't know, my mom really loved Barry Manilow and
Mm-hmm.
I just remember Barbara Streisand was a big favorite of theirs and they didn't listen to classical music, so that was new for me as well to really
Okay.
learn about this whole world of music. Like where is the horn used, you know? I
Right.
mean, and so it opened up this whole new genre for me that it was completely introduced to me by my friends and to my by my teacher. So I started like buying, I think I bought a cassette tape of the Mozart horn concertos. I mean, this is back
Mm-hmm.
when record stores were in malls, you know?
Yes.
And
I remember
and
those.
remember those days? And you go like I went to the classical section and found the horn concertos and so I listened to that and then once I got into youth orchestra my friends were telling me about Mahler symphonies and things like that use horns in a really big way. And then right around then my dad joined like the Columbia Records Club, where you can like when
Yes.
CDs were a thing then and you could send off for them.
Yes.
So that's when some more classical records started showing up in our house. So I remember one of the first ones was Holst Planets and things like that. So I was really driving the bus as far as what this thing was. Because my parents didn't they didn't have an awareness about it. So
Mm-hmm.
I would find out about things from friends, like I was in this youth orchestra that was close to my house and then the first horn who was a couple years older than me said she played with the Chicago Youth Symphony and I was like, "Oh, what's that? I want to audition for that." And I would come home and tell my mom and it was just sort of like that kind of thing. "Oh, mom, guess what? I came home from band camp, music camp, and I found out there's an audition to go to Europe for a month in the summer. So I auditioned for that." And I think it probably, I don't know about the financial side of how that
Mm-hmm.
made them feel, because that's a big deal. Like, hey, I just got invited to go to Europe for a month. How are you going to pay
Yeah.
for it, mom and dad? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but those experiences were life changing. So I'm really glad they figured it out. And then, I remember going to college. I wanted the Chicago Youth Orchestra had a career or a college fair type thing where all the conservatories representatives came. And I found out about Juilliard and Curtis and all these fancy schools that were not in Illinois. And that my parents were like, no, we don't have the money to tour to try those places. We don't have the money to send you out of state. You have to choose a school in Illinois. So that was really a bummer for me at the time, but I didn't have a choice, right? So I auditioned at a few schools in Illinois. I chose University of Illinois. And then when I didn't feel challenged, I wasn't very happy there, I called my parents and said, I'm going to audition at Indiana next week, and if you can't take me, I'm going to take a bus. And they said, all right, well, we'll come down and we'll take you there. So I think I felt like Indiana was close enough to Illinois that it wouldn't, even though it was out of state, it wasn't like, hey, I'm going to New York City. It wasn't like so out of their kind of mind that it wasn't possible. So then I auditioned and got a scholarship to go to Indiana. So then I moved there. So it was a better school, and it was better in a lot of ways. But I really had to tell them what was happening pretty much,
Yeah, I'm curious, since they didn't start out with any kind of classical music background, since you said that they did start buying some classical albums and things to listen to, did they actually gain an understanding, or was it more sort of, I just want to hear the kind of things you're likely to play?
I don't know. I think it was more, there was so many choices, and I think my dad probably figured, let's add some classical stuff in here since that's what you're interested in, or maybe I grabbed the sheet, because you could choose so many.
Oh yeah.
I mean, and I think maybe he probably ran out of things he wanted. So I don't know,
So you got to pick the rest. I was just curious because my parents are both very into classical music, which is how I got started singing in choirs. But my dad's parents in particular never really were, I mean, I'm jealous because his mother went to hear Benny Goodman twice. When she was in her 20s, I'm like, wait, that's not fair. But that was really more their thing. And I'm not exactly sure how it is that my dad landed on the classical side. But until the day he died, my grandfather would say to me, if we took him to a concert, he would say, I don't really understand what I'm hearing. You'll have to explain this to me. This isn't, this is lovely, but I don't know what it is. And, things like that, which is kind of why I wondered what your parents ended up learning or getting, or
they still don't listen to it.
So it's you who picked the CDs.
It's really like they never bought into the whole world of it. They would go to concerts, but and it's certainly not every concert. And then later years it was just my job, you know what I mean? I mean, they would come to my big youth orchestra concerts, and when I came home from that tour that I mentioned, the European tour that I went with, it was a camp in Michigan called Blue Lake Fine Arts Camp. And they had this thing called the Concert Collage, where the group of kids who went played an orchestra, band, jazz band, if it applied to their instrument, and choir. So we did all four things as a big group of kids together. So it was really cool. And on the way home, we did a small U.S. tour just of the Midwest, and my dad volunteered to host an Illinois segment of the tour, and then so he organized this whole thing. We had the concert at the college nearby at Northern Illinois, and he actually conducted one of the marches. They
oh cool.
It was like Stars and Stripes or something, where the orchestra doesn't really need the conductor that much. But it was one of the biggest thrills he ever had, like to go up there and do that.
Cool.
Yeah. So that was nice. But yeah, like they were into it because I was into it, but they didn't become classical music lovers because of it at all.
Okay. So was classical music sort of a form of rebellion for you at all?
That's a good question. I don't know. I always kind of thought, like, what other parents have kids in their bedroom blasting Mahler symphonies?
Yeah.
or like Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto #2 or something. It's like I don't know. I think it was just a thing I discovered that I fell in love with. I felt like the music spoke to me in a way. It was this long form thing that could take you on a journey.
Yes.
And back then, listening was really intentional. Then this is kind of what I miss about listening to music now, because everything is streaming and you have endless choices. I really miss being like, I'm in the mood for this particular piece, and I thought of it because I saw it on the shelf. I pulled it off, and I'm going to sit down and listen to this whole thing. And I used to even fall asleep to specific movements that I liked that relaxed me and took me on I felt like, I don't know, for some reason I felt like the music understood what I was going through. Like it musically explained it, or musically empathized with me, or something that's hard to explain with words. But yeah, I just really fell in love with a lot of that repertoire.
That makes perfect sense to me. And I've wondered sometimes what it must have been like, 150 years ago, when you didn't have, you certainly didn't have Spotify, but you didn't even have a radio. And so music was an event, and you would go and very deliberately say, I'm going to the opera, I'm going to the symphony, I'm, going to whatever, and go and sit and listen like that.
Yeah.
I think, music of any kind has become so incidental. It's background noise in a lot of cases. And I wonder what we've lost because of it. And I don't know how we could say. I'm sure somebody's studying something somewhere, but it does make me wonder. I will admit, I was the kid who on road trips and for concerts was allowed to take a book with me, because I couldn't sit still long enough. I could still listen, but my eyes needed something else to do. And my brother was allowed to draw, which is part of why he's an architect now. But still, they would take us to concerts when we were kids, and they were very clear about how you are not allowed to talk. If you have a problem, you have to whisper, but make sure it's important. And, all of that kind of good concert etiquette that does not exist anymore. A couple of years ago, I used to teach, and we took the whole school to a concert, and I was just beyond appalled at how kids sat there staring at their phones the entire time, texting each other, not paying any attention at all. And I was like, okay, this may not be your cup of tea, but you could try, and you could at least not be rude to other people who want to try, because this is really distracting. And it was worse than I could have even imagined that it would be. And the awful thing is that I think I was one of the only teachers who was upset about it. Because this is kind of like,
I still can't believe kids are allowed to bring their phones in those kind of settings, or even at school. But why didn't they set that expectation up before the concert? I wonder.
I don't remember if they tried or not. They may have tried, but since it was mostly a school event and not, I think it was open to the public, but not many members of the public came. I think everybody may have just viewed it as, this is an internal thing and we're not going to worry about it. But it was still just, I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't listen, and anybody else who wanted to listen had to have been having a problem. And, and it still was just like, this is not how your school should be represented.
Right.
Even if it's just to the performers on the stage, which included the school chorus. So you would think that, your friends are up there, but even that was not as exciting as staring at a phone screen the entire time. So yeah, my parents would not have approved.
No, definitely not. And I think you have to change your kind of context for what it is before you go. Because like, as you said, in today's world, we have music that's, I don't know, 2 minutes long, maybe 1.5 minutes long. Songs aren't long.
No.
And then to say, you want to come and listen to a symphony, the whole thing is an hour.
Yeah.
The concert will be 2 hours long. It's a different kind of experience, but yet we still go to movies that are 2 hours long, because the movie takes you on a journey. So it's a similar thing as that, except it's only with your ears.
Right.
And so I think the active listening piece is really the main thing that you have to think about and maybe relearn, because I remember some of the most extraordinary listening experiences I've had were when I sat down in front of it was a record player, even though records weren't, by this time it was grad school. I'm thinking of a particular time where I needed to study Tchaikovsky's Symphony No. 5. And I went to the library to get a record and put it on. And with headphones, I just sat there and listened to the whole thing. And that active listening I would recommend it to anyone to set, sort of like how I'm sitting down to read a book right now. I'm sitting down to watch a movie right now. Try it sometime. Get a piece that's an hour or 45 minutes long and sit down with headphones and listen. And you'll be amazed at the kind of journey you go on.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I think I want to say we've lost it. I kind of wonder how many people have had it in the last couple of decades. But yeah. And the other thing is I heard an interview a couple weeks ago, and the person that was being interviewed mentioned that really musicians are the only group of people that are actually taught to listen. And I'd never thought about that before, but as soon as I heard it, I thought, how true is that?
I think you're right.
And I mean, and I can see as I'm saying this where actors are taught to listen, but not in quite the same way. You're taught to hear your lines and react to your lines and that kind of thing. But there's so much that goes into musical listening because, I know from singing in choirs, and I have to imagine that it's similar, but probably not identical. In an orchestra, you want to blend with the people around you. So you don't want to be too loud and you don't want to be too soft. You want to be sure that you're in tune. You're paying attention to the conductor, but you're also hearing all of the other instruments and the other voices and how all of that comes together, which is a whole level that a lot of people don't ever get.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it really is true. I mean, listening is such a huge part of playing, because if you're just paying attention to what you're doing, everyone's gonna know.
Yeah,
it's obvious by the way you're playing. So listening is definitely integral in learning music.
Yeah, I think that if you're not listening, I think listening is integral to gelling as a group too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can't happen otherwise. It does make me sort of wonder, even people who do take, lessons when they're in elementary school or junior high, a lot of people give it up. And I wonder how many people don't realize that they learned this little bit, and if they lose it, I don't know. I'm thinking out loud here, but it seems a shame to me that we don't learn to listen. And I feel like now with screens and social media and everything, the last thing anybody does is listen. Yeah. But that's probably a tangent.
Yeah, that's a big open can of worms to open.
Can of worms. Yeah. So tell me, when you finally got a job playing, what was that like?
Yeah, so
out of student land.
Yeah. Well, it's weird as a musician to transfer out of feeling like a student, because when you're learning an instrument, you kind of you never stop learning. You always want to improve. Mm-hmm. And so the first job I ever got, in the music world, we call it winning an audition. So you have to audition. And if you win, which means you're the one that's chosen, then you get the job. The prize is the job. Mm-hmm. Congratulations, you get to work now. So, but
that means you get to get paid.
Exactly. So the first job I got, it didn't pay very much, and it was tough because I moved to Virginia to play with the Virginia Symphony, and it was one thing I didn't know about music careers that I didn't realize then, and even though I was seeing it in front of my face, and I realize now that I'm older, because I was only 20, I think 6 or 5 when I got that job, was that for most orchestras, I'd say for every orchestra, but there's a top tier. So there's levels of orchestras. There's New York Phil, Chicago Symphony, Los Angeles, San Francisco, that range of the big city orchestras make the most money. And it's usually around 160 as the base. So that's the base. And then whether you're a principal player or some other title position, you can negotiate more money on top of that. So that's the kind of job that you'd get where maybe you don't have to think about your other side hustles or things, because it's a livable salary. But also those are the busiest orchestras. And then you have another level below that that's like a mid-tier, and maybe they make like 80-ish, 70, 60, 80, somewhere around there. And that is kind of a range you can still live on, but you probably want to teach and do other things if you want to, depending on your lifestyle. If you're single and you live in an apartment, maybe that's fine. You can just go to work and that's it. But when you have a family, the usual things as you evolve and grow into your adulthood and you have kids and you have a family, depending on how you live your life, you want to make more money. So you teach a lot of times. And then there's like levels below that. And Virginia Symphony is at the kind of bottom of that. Like the people that were there already taught at colleges, taught lots of lessons. Maybe they were married to people who made more money than them. There was a lot of like that kind of situation. And I rolled in there as a 20-something with a ton of student debt and a ton of credit card debt from freelancing in Chicago. Right. And it was just really a struggle to live there financially, because here I am thinking, I want a job. This is the big prize. This is what you get after grad school sometimes. I mean, it's pretty rare to get a job right out of grad school, but then I realized later what people were doing was they were making a life in that city. And I didn't really want to make a life there. I didn't see myself there for a long time. And I was also disappointed. I'm like, clearly I didn't do any math, but I was like, I don't want to wait on tables anymore. I did that in Chicago. So I realized I was making the same amount of money at home, really. So I decided to leave after a year, and I went back to Chicago to freelance and eventually taught a lot of lessons. And I spent a lot of time as a freelancer, and that felt kind of like that felt like it was a career, but there was always that desire to get a big job, one of those top tier orchestras. Right. And so I auditioned for some of those. At times I probably took like 25 auditions. I've never really counted up how many I've taken. And some of them I've gotten to the semifinals or finals, because there's usually 3 rounds that you have to get through to get to the end. And, but didn't get a job for quite a long time, and it's expensive to go and fly around and take those. So I did a lot of freelancing in Chicago and was lucky to play with the Chicago Symphony sometimes. And then other times I was playing with suburban orchestras and that kind of thing. And then in 2003, at the end of 2003, I went to Beijing and I played with the Beijing Symphony for 3 months. So that was interesting.
I bet.
Yeah, that was a good experience, because that was a full-time deal. And I did that for a few months, but I realized I didn't want to make a life in China. I didn't see myself living there. So I came back. But since I had so much time to practice there, I felt really prepared for auditions. And I auditioned for the North Carolina Symphony, which is where I am now. And I wasn't the winner, but I was the runner-up. They invited me to move here, and play assistant horn, which is sort of, it's a fifth horn. There's 4 horns in an orchestra, and the fifth horn is the assistant. So it's kind of like you help the first horn when they don't have solos, but they're saving their lips for the important stuff. You play. So that's kind of what it is. But over the 10 years I played there, a couple of times I had 1-year positions playing fourth horn, and sometimes I would play other parts depending on the need and depending on the personnel, because over that 10 years, like, people quit, people retired, different stuff happens. People get the job and then they don't get to keep it. They don't get tenure. They get fired, essentially. So different things happened over the years. And then once eventually I had my daughter. I mean, I got married here to a violinist here. He started the same year I did. And eventually we had a baby, and she's 9 now. But when she was just born, it was really hard for me to work the same hours as my husband and have us both gone, especially on weekend nights, 3 nights a week. And playing assistant wasn't the most fulfilling work, so I stopped working with the symphony at that point. It just felt right for me and my family, so that was when I stopped working with the symphony. I still freelance with other groups in the city, but at that point was when I started to experiment with my own projects.
Okay. Before we get to that, I'm just curious to know, how does playing in an orchestra in Beijing differ from playing in an orchestra here? Are there big cultural differences that go into that, or is it pretty much the same?
Yeah, well, the big cultural difference was that they will play a lot of Chinese music for certain concerts. So they would, at least the way this orchestra was set up, they would play a regular classical concert, at least, I think maybe once a week. Maybe not every.
Oh, wow.
I can't remember if we did it wasn't every week that we had a classical concert. Some weeks we would just have these with the thing about what was going on. But then the regular concerts usually would have a guest conductor. So the guest conductor was always from Europe, or one time we had a conductor from Mexico, and they spoke English at rehearsal. So in those cases, I was more comfortable than everyone else. But the repertoire was the common language because it's the standard orchestral repertoire. Yeah.
Wow, that must have been a serious adventure. It sounds like it anyway.
It was. And another cultural difference is that the orchestra pays for well, actually, I'm not sure about the Chinese people, but it's possible that the orchestra paid for their apartment, because I think the whole orchestra lived in the same apartment building.
Oh, wow.
And they would bus them in to work.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want anyone to quote me because I'm not exactly sure that's how it was set up, but I think it was. And then the 3 of us that were foreigners, we had our apartments were in the same building too, but we lived right around the corner from the hall, so we would walk there. It was really close.
Well, that's convenient too.
Yeah, it was such an experience. Like, looking back on it, I'm like, I can't believe I did that.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, that's really interesting. So, but I do want to hear about what you started doing after you left the North Carolina orchestra.
Yeah, so it was always a thing to get a big job. It's like the dream of every classical musician. But obviously, if there's only a handful of those orchestras, not everyone can get that. And it doesn't mean that other orchestras aren't just as good. The North Carolina Symphony is a really high quality orchestra that is sort of a mid-tier, and the cost of living is a lot lower. So you look at like living in San Francisco, and even if you make that kind of money, the rent's there.
Right.
Or, the cost of buying a house is exorbitant. But still, it was a thing that I still thought that I wanted, up until a point where I realized, do I really want to move? I like living in Raleigh. I like the city. I don't really want to go back on the audition path. Taking auditions is grueling. You have to learn a lot of music. You have to be at the top of your game. You have to go and travel and be at the best possible level for that day and compete against 150 other people for one position. And I just didn't. I think I took one other audition before I was like, no, I don't want to do this. I really don't. It was for an orchestra in Chicago for the lyric opera. And I showed up there in January. It was like a frozen tundra. And I was like, oh yeah, I remember how this is in winter. I don't know if I want to come back here. So at that point, I really didn't know what I was going to do, but I decided to start looking around online at what other people are doing that have done something outside of either teaching in a university setting or getting a job in an orchestra. And I discovered a lot of people doing a lot of different things. And so I started writing my thoughts about creating a career path in this field or creating a career in this field, and my thoughts on going into tons of debt over music school, which is a whole other topic. Just sharing my thoughts and opinions online, which was kind of scary at first because who am I to publish what I think?
Right.
Who am I? And so that was like kind of what I battled at first, but kind of plowed through that and realized the more people that I discovered doing different things, I thought I want to create a podcast and interview these people, find out what their process is and what made them create a different career. And were they on the path to a traditional career and they changed their mind? Like what went on? And I wanted to expose and highlight all of this stuff for people who probably feel a lot like me. So I started the podcast Crushing Classical, and I'm going into the 4th season of it.
Nice.
And and I've learned so much from picking these people's brains about, some people thought they were going to get a job. Some people were in 1-year positions and at big orchestras. And then when it came time to audition for that spot that they'd been playing, they didn't get it. That happens a lot too. Yeah. You think you might be a shoo-in, and then you audition and someone else comes in and wins. And then you're out on your head. So you have a choice. Do I go keep taking auditions, or do I create something different? And so lots of people create something different, and those people have been on my podcast, and I'm always looking for more people similar to that, or even if it's not a story like that, but some people they know from the start that they don't want to have an orchestra job. And so, because it's not the other thing I learned about having an orchestra job is that everything's not, oh, yeah, you get paid to play your instrument. Isn't it just such a dream,
Yeah, I was wondering about that because it has to be different. It has to be different than what you expect.
It is. It's not like youth orchestra where you play all your favorite repertoire and you have tons of time to rehearse it and get better at it. And no, it's like you have a week, and sometimes it's not your favorite repertoire. Actually, most of the time it's not, and you have to travel. And you have to play a video game concert, where it's like the music from video games. Oh, wow. Is that what you went to school for? It's like, it's you play what the management decides that you play. It's not like this beautiful artistic freedom type deal. It's a job, but you get paid.
Right.
And at times it's amazing. At times you get to play your favorite piece and it's otherworldly, so it's definitely not all, rainbows and unicorns like you think it is when you're in college, honestly. And I wish that someone would have come into my college experience and said that blatantly and honestly. And that's one of the reasons why I started writing and started publishing podcasts, because I don't think people are honest about it enough. It's like they don't want to say anything bad.
Yeah, they don't want to shatter your dream, right?
Yeah, and generally, musicians in general never like to say anything bad publicly because they like to have the facade, mostly, of like, everything's great.
Yeah.
It's such a world. It's such a personality type. It's so funny. But so I shouldn't make blanket statements. Not everyone's like that, but but like, so I've just learned so much from interviewing people, and also gotten the guts to start my own ensemble. I started one, and we're having a concert coming up in November. It's a combination of jazz musicians and classical musicians, and we play whatever we want, and it's so much fun. It's like, we haven't played classical music. We play tango, we play jazz, we play bossa nova, and it's really fun.
Oh, that's awesome.
So yeah, it's really great. And honestly, I got the gumption to do it from talking to people who've done it before me on the podcast, like if they can do it, I can do it. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah. Yeah. And so the podcast and the platform has developed, because ultimately when I started it, I was hoping to create also an income stream for myself
Mm-hmm.
because I wanted to maybe not replace, I wanted to do something different. I never wanted to stop playing horn
Mm-hmm.
at all, and I still play with the ballet and sometimes the opera here too. But it's perfect because those aren't full-time or jobs like the orchestra.
Right.
So, but I still wanted to make money. Like that was part of the whole kind of motivation to look around and do something different. Like, how can I make money doing
Mm-hmm.
something different? And that's a big part of the questioning on the podcast too, is that do you make money doing the thing you do? And so eventually, over the time I've been doing this, how do I make money too?
Mm-hmm.
And it was unclear for a long time until people started coming to me asking me for advice on how to grow their audience, how to navigate social media. Because at a certain point, I realized, gosh, I've been studying this. I've been digging into like the nitty gritty of how Facebook and Instagram works
Mm-hmm.
so that you can find your audience for the thing you do. And people started coming to me for help on that. And I realized that's what I want to do too, because I get really excited trying to crack the code, figure
Yeah.
out the puzzle. And so now I'm starting, like officially, at first it's like people help, can you help me? Sure. Let's figure out what works just for you. And it's not really like I haven't hung my sign out on my door that I do it yet.
Right.
So, but this fall at the beginning of the season 4, I announced that yes, this is what I'm doing. I'm coaching people. I'm starting a program that starts in December for people who have something they do. Either they already have it and they're not being super public about it, or they want to create something. The biggest hurdle is creating an audience for the thing that
Mm-hmm.
you're doing. As you know, as a
Yep.
podcaster, you need to find people to listen to it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
So that's
I think when other people come to you and start asking you how you've done something, that's usually a good sign that you must be doing something right. So I think that's really cool
yeah.
that you're running with it.
Yeah. I know. And it's funny how you don't realize that you have kind of, I guess I could say a passion. I hesitate to use the word because I think sometimes we feel like, well, am I really passionate about it? But like when I
Yeah.
start talking, and that's a whole other topic too that
Uh-huh.
people argue about, right? Like, am I supposed to feel so like lit up about it constantly? Like you feel like that when you're a musician, like, am I still passionate about this thing I'm doing? I don't feel super excited about this concert or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's dangerous to use the word all the time. But I notice that when I talk with people about it, I get really excited. I
Mm-hmm.
get the main underlying reason why I love helping people with it is because what I found through starting this podcast is I found my voice. And
Yeah.
so I want everyone to find their voice. It's like I realized that all these things that kind of weighed me down and upset me and triggered me about like a lot of being a classical music is waiting to be chosen,
Mm-hmm.
waiting to be called for a gig, waiting to be named the winner, and there's no power in that. And
Yeah.
so doing something of your own and then finding the audience for that's where the power lies. Once you have an asset like an audience, you can help people, you can
Mm-hmm.
reach people. And that's what's so exciting.
Yeah. And it's interesting because when you're describing the process of, going through all of the auditions and everything, what struck me is that it's got to start to feel like you're waiting for somebody else to tell you that you're good enough.
Yes,
Yeah. And that
that's exactly.
is only productive for so long.
You're waiting
If
for
at all.
permission. Yep.
Yeah, you're waiting for permission, you're waiting for the seal of approval that says, yes, you really are a musician, yes, you really are, an actor,
Yeah,
whatever. And yeah.
exactly. And so like when you said like what was it like to finally break free of that student feeling and go into being a professional? So often you don't feel like you're allowed to say you are a professional. at a certain, like, am I really a musician? I don't work full time as a
Mm-hmm.
musician. I also do these other things. Does that mean I'm a real musician? There's a lot of identity stuff. And
Yeah.
a lot of times that's what holds people back about being public. Because what if I announce that I'm doing this other thing? What will my colleagues think? Will they think I'm not playing anymore? Will they say,
Yeah.
"Do you still play anymore?" What if they think I've stopped playing? Like, I think there's so much worry about what people will think,
Mm-hmm.
and also what you think about yourself. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and there are so many people who are reluctant to call themselves artists or writers or, or creative in any way too. And I think it's all really part of the same problem or situation. It's like, but am I a real this? Like you're saying, it's like, well, do you write? Do you do it on a fairly regular basis? Do you enjoy it? Do you like playing with words? Are you creating something or are you just thinking about it? Because if you're creating something, then you're really a writer or a painter or, whatever. And we get so hung up on that idea of being a real this. It's like, well, your real may not look like anybody else's real too. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And that's a big part of the audience piece because the main thing is proclaiming that you are who you are,
mm-hmm.
and this is what you stand for, and this is what you do, and this is what you think, and that's how you create content, and then that's how you start to build an audience. And people want to follow and want to know what you're doing because you said you do it.
Right.
I just listened to another podcast. It was an interview with Malcolm Gladwell on Oprah's Super Soul podcast, which is my favorite podcast right now, by the way. He said that in this book, he has a new book coming out, or maybe it's already out. I'm not sure. And I have to read it. It's so fascinating. But one of the things he said was that people never expect that you're lying. Like, humans are not wired to think you're lying. Like, they will expect that you're telling the truth. It's just like a natural wiring. So if you say you are what you are, then you are.
Mm-hmm.
And people will be like, okay, that's cool. It's not like we don't have to worry that like other people are going, are you really that?
Yeah, that's really interesting because I've never really thought about that. And I know what it's like to be, to tell somebody, yeah, I'm a writer. I wrote a book, and you sort of have this feeling like, please don't ask me too many questions because yes, I still have a day job and all of these things that you think that means that I don't have and that means that I'm not really a real writer. Right. But yeah, it's complicated what we do internally when we confront that idea of this is what I am and actually saying it to somebody else. And I don't think we realize because even as you're saying that, I'm thinking, yeah, if I meet somebody in the grocery store and they tell me that they're a lawyer, I believe them.
Exactly. You don't go, well, let me Google you because I don't believe you're a lawyer. You say, oh, that's cool. You're a lawyer. Awesome. And like, that's really a big part of what we'll work on in the program, because honestly, that's kind of at the root cause of what stops people, and I remember when I started my podcast and like, I emailed people to say, would you like to be on my podcast? And it felt really scary because I didn't have a podcast at that point.
Yeah.
At that point, no, I don't yet have a podcast. You're the first guest.
Yeah.
But I'm saying here, I have a podcast, which puts me on the hook, which is scary too, because, now I have to figure out how to do that before the deadline, and that's scary. But it's the first step in making things happen.
Yeah. And I can say from my own experience starting this podcast, I approached somebody about doing an interview at a point where I barely had the idea to do the podcast. And so it was like, I think I want to do this thing. I don't have a name for it. I don't, I have this vague sense of what I want to do with it. But, I was talking to this person and I thought, what's the worst that can happen? He says no.
Right.
I walk away with nothing less than I have right now. And I was totally honest. I mean, I said, I'm starting a podcast. This idea is so new that I don't even know what I'm going to call it. But if you're game, I would love to talk to you. And he said, yeah, sure. So, I mean, you never know what'll happen if you just ask.
Yep.
So they say no. Okay. You move on to the next person.
I love what you said. I love how you said that. Like, if he says no, I have nothing less than I have right now.
Right. Right.
That's so true.
It's like, okay, I tried. It was worth a shot.
Yeah.
And there have been a couple people like that where it's just, you're sort of sitting there, you're going, yeah, they're never going to say yes. And then they do. Hey, why not?
Yeah. Which means you need to go for bigger asks, right?
Yeah, right. But it's also like it so builds up your confidence because you're like, hey, they might say yes. It might be this great interview, and
yeah.
And almost inevitably it is. And so then you think, what, why not? Who else can I try? So yeah, exactly. It definitely, it gives you that momentum that you need to actually get started and say, hey, I'm doing this thing. This is what I do.
Exactly.
Yeah. So is your program geared specifically toward musicians, or is anybody who's looking to build an audience welcome?
I really think anyone's welcome. Right now my audience is musicians, so that's who I'm inviting, but I would invite anybody.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's really the same concept.
Okay.
Totally.
Yeah, I mean, It seems like it should apply to a much larger audience. So.
Oh yes, definitely.
Very cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I'm about to do a free training about what we'll be doing, and it'll start before this podcast comes out, but at the time it releases, I'll make sure you have links to the videos.
Excellent.
So if someone catches this episode and they want to check out the free training, they're welcome to do so. And I'll make sure those links are with you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I'm just curious, what, in the course of doing your podcast, since you are looking for people who've come up with, paths that are not the beaten path, what surprised you the most?
Gosh, that's a stumper. I don't know. What surprised me the most about the people who I've interviewed?
Or
is that
what
you're
they've
saying?
decided to do that's, not an orchestra job.
Oh, okay. That's a good question. Let's see. Well, sometimes I'm just amazed by what has been accomplished. Like in the case of my friend Giacomo, who went from being a tuba player to a conductor. He is the music director of the Amarillo Symphony, as well as a guest conductor around the country and the world, I think. I'm not sure about the world, but definitely around the country. And he's like the main conductor for Ben Folds. And
Ooh.
Yeah, and he also started his own ensemble called New Deco Ensemble in Miami. It's so cool. It's really the inspiration for my group Contempo, where they play unique kind of genre bending stuff, different genres, like genre whatever is what they do.
That sounds
sometimes
really
they
cool.
blend classical music. Yeah, sometimes they blend classical music with different rhythms, or sometimes they've been bringing in a lot of really cool guest artists. So I think that's really inspiring. One of the people I interviewed is a composer who started this really cool concert series called Mind Travel, where he takes musicians on this journey. It's sort of a meditative experience, and it's completely improvised and composed on the spot. And he plays piano in beautiful settings like the beach in California, or sometimes he's been in Times Square in New York, in Central Park, not Times Square, too noisy.
Yeah, just a little.
And but he uses Bluetooth headsets, and so people can really they can be in this situation where maybe they wouldn't be able to hear a concert. Like the waves are crashing in on the beach, you're not going to necessarily hear a piano. And so you have these headsets, and he has like tiki torches on the beach, and it's really a neat concert experience that you can find anywhere else. Yeah. So that was someone I had on. His name is Murray Hittery. And yeah, I think those are the two really, there's another guy who writes music that blends he conducts it, and he composes it as well, and then he takes it to orchestras and conducts it. His name is Steve Hackman, and he writes mashups. So it'll be like, let's see, what's Tchaikovsky and Drake music?
Oh, wow.
Or Coldplay and Mozart together. And it's merged like a mashup. So that's kind of interesting. So people are doing some really cool things.
That does sound really cool. And I like how often improv came up while you were talking, because I just, when you mentioned Ben Folds, I don't know if everybody who's listening, and maybe I'm the one who's late to the party, I don't know, but when he just sits on stage with an orchestra and makes up a piece out of nothing.
Yep. I know, it's cool.
It's so amazing to watch. There are a bunch of videos on YouTube. If you haven't ever seen this, you should check it out. But yeah.
Yeah, I've been on stage when he does it.
Oh, really?
It's really fun. Yeah.
Oh, do tell.
Yeah. Yeah. He picks the people in advance, and I think they kind of have a little chat about what they might do, so that it doesn't completely put the musicians on the spot. Mm-hmm. But they do. He makes the stuff up, and he layers it on, and then makes a song. So, yeah, it's really cool. It's not the only thing he does.
What's it like
concert.
To be on the stage while he's doing that?
It's fun. It's really fun to watch him, and the audience loves it.
Oh yeah, that's clear from the videos. But
yeah, and he does a different thing. So I've played concerts with him where there's two. I think usually there's two concerts, Friday night and Saturday night, and he does a different thing each night. And of course, there's also, it's not the whole concert. Like there's a lot of music he plays that's already written in his hits and everything like that. But yeah, he's really cool.
He seems like a really amazing guy.
Yeah.
Well, now I'm so jealous.
Yeah. And those are like the Pops concerts that we, that aren't as frequent, obviously, but they're still there. That's the kind of one that it would be a lot more fun than, say, the video game one or whatever, like something with an artist like that where it's really special.
Yeah. I haven't thought about those in a little while, but they are really cool. So anybody who's listening, seriously, go check them out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this has been really an awesome conversation. I feel like we've covered so many cool things. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And,
really appreciate being on.
Oh, you're welcome.
This was a fun conversation.
Yeah. And I think, anybody who's curious about what else is out there music-wise should totally check out your podcast. So it's Crushing Classical. Check it out.
Yes. Thank you.
So you're welcome. Thanks much. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you got some new perspectives on the classical music world and on finding new ways to pursue the things you love from Tracy Friedlander. If you're a classical musician, and even if you're not, I encourage you to check out her Crushing Classical podcast. You can find links for that, the program she's offering, and some of the musicians she mentioned in the show notes at fycuriosity.com. Spoiler, if you've never seen Ben Folds do orchestral improv, you don't know what you're missing. See you next time. You can find show notes and learn more about how you can work with me to follow your curiosity at fycuriosity.com. I'd also love for you to join the conversation on Instagram. You'll find me at fycuriosity. Follow Your Curiosity is produced by me, Nancy Norbeck, with music by Joseph McDade. If you like Follow Your Curiosity, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. It really helps me reach new listeners. See you next time.